Kallan plodded through the rain down the mountain's side with little thought to the road ahead. Anger stifled her most reasonable thoughts as the steep slope forced Kallan along faster than she had intended. Each jarring footfall barely gripped the ground as she clumped about in trousers too big for her. She slipped twice, caught her foot on a sharp stone more than once, and kicked up a roost of willow grouse that drummed off. At the base of the mountain, Kallan scuffed to a premature halt and gasped. Within a fortnight, the warmest of summer days had ended in Alfheim, and the late summer harvests had rolled in. Bold reds and gold painted the land and stretched from the end of her path to a river that drained from a wide blue lake. The wide waters curved with the land and vanished in the distance behind the mountains. The mountains seemed to rise out of the land at every turn and pulled the valley floor. Rune had been right to leave Astrid. White, jagged rocks covered the terrain, contrasting the reds, yellows, and greens of the tundra grasses, as if someone had randomly dumped them there. Some stones were small enough to fill the palm of her hand, while others were magnificent in size, nearly twice as tall as Rune. The ground was like one giant sheet of stone that stretched beyond the mountains. Barren tundra grass blanketed the rocky earths in places, giving the illusion that the ground was soft beneath the red tundra willow and reindeer lichen. White tundra cotton and pink Arctic bell heather provided frequent patches of color to the various moss and grass and stone. Lush greens of the tundra had thickened, welcoming the harvest with vibrant reds and vivid oranges. Sunset yellows and white stones painted the tundra in an overall striking display against the gray of endless rain. Behind Kallan, thick clouds pushed about the mountain's peak and spilled into the valleys like a vast suspended waterfall, wrapping the land in a wet chill and took in with every breath. Beside the river's bend along the harsh tundra, Astrid grazed peacefully alongside the large span of purple mountain saxifrage. The red and black of his coat greatly contrasted the scene. "Hardly hidden," she muttered, but grinned nevertheless. At the sight of her dearest friend, anxiety lifted from her shoulders. She wiped the rain from her face and continued down the path to Astrid's pasture. Beside him, Kallan buried her face into Astrid's black mane and brushed her hand down his long neck, breathing in the sweet, lingering scent of Alfheim and hay. The scent of home was almost gone, and she swiped at her eyes, irritated at the tears that burned there. "Excuse me," as Astrid nudged her pouch. Moments later, the stallion happily crunched the apple as Kallan gazed up at the mountain. Following along her path through the throbbing handicap she had bestowed upon him, Rune trudged in the rain down to meet her, and came to stand before her, both soaked in the rain. Rune extended his hand. "What?" she asked. "The dagger," he said over the downpour. Making her intentions clear, Kallan flicked her wrist and summoned a flame that danced undaunted by the weather in her palm. "Not a chance!" "I don't suppose you'd be open to a truce," he suggested. A smile cocked on the corner of his mouth. A burst of flame left her hand. Rune reached out and snatched the flame, drawing it in as he had before. Kallan's mouth fell agape as she watched Rune draw on her sleeve with ease until she severed the scythe, leaving Rune unscathed. "Now then," he said, and as if with all his might, he launched himself at Kallan, plowing into her stomach and sending them both to the ground in the rain and the wet and the mud. He was on her, restraining her arms at her wrists over her head as she fought. "Get off!" she howled, firing off another stream of scythe that Rune caught with his hand and drew in. "You want to go home?" Rune shouted. Kallan twisted and squirmed. "You want to get out of this forsaken land the Dvagar dragged you into," Rune said as Kallan bucked beneath him. "I will not follow," Kallan said. "My home is south, and to the south I will go, and I'll not let the spoiled Liasafal prince stop me. If we travel apart, we risk not making it back to Alfheim at all," Rune said. "I'll go my own way, to the south, and Viken," Kallan said. "The Dvagar are on that road, Kallan," Rune said, silencing her tantrum. Kallan stopped moving, unable to mask the horror splayed upon her face. "If you take the southern roads, you will place yourself right where they want you, right where they expect you to go," he shouted over the pouring rain. His grip remained adamant, ensuring she wouldn't move until he had his say. "Come with me to Nidaros," Rune said. "I will speak to the Jarl there, and escort you home myself." The rain spluttered the ground. "To Lorlenalin," she said. "To Alfheim," he said. Kallan stiffened in protest beneath him, but she didn't dare press her luck just yet. "And you'll show me the way?" she asked. "I will show you the way," he nodded. "And I will ride alongside you through the land of men and their wars. Kallan asked, the fear clear in her eyes. To sail with you on to Alfheim, and away from the Dvalgar? As far as I can take you away from them. For as long as it takes to get home, Rune vowed. Until Alfheim, Kallan said, making it clear she had no intentions of following him one step further toward Gunir. Until Alfheim, he said tightly. Kallan relaxed, and the moment her guard dropped, Rune grabbed the dagger, wrestling it with ease from her grip, before he stood and pulled her to her feet. He shifted to move and returned to Astrid, but Kallan tightened her grip, refusing to relinquish his hand. Through the rain, Rune held her gaze. "Give me my dagger," Kallan said. Rune chuckled and tightened his grip on her soft hand in reply. "Not a chance in hell." First Midgard, then Alfheim, Rune thought. After that we can balk, bicker, and bite over which road to take. The beast had awakened hungrily for Kallan's save, now purred contentedly, sated for the moment. Alone, Rune stared back up from the path in the rain. 10 minutes to collect the camp, extinguish the fire, and erase the trail. 10 minutes was too long to leave any Dokafar alone. "If you make me hunt you down, princess," he called through the rain, "I will bind you with whatever I find you." "If you make me hunt you, princess," he called through the rain, "I will bind you when I find you." Rune grinned as Kallan stiffened her spine and crinkled her nose, taking extra care to ensure he saw it before he turned. "And grab the saxifrage for the road. The purple flower's at your feet," he said, bounding up the rest of the path. "It's edible." Kallan burrowed her eyes into the back of his head before staring at the large span of purple flowers balanced on tall, leafy stalks at her feet. She pulled at the tundra plant, snapping some off too easily mid-stem, while others came up properly by their roots from between the stones. She collected the plant until she had gathered several handfuls. After dumping the pile of wildflower on the ground beside Astrid, Kallan looked back to the path. Although he was out of sight, Rune's dry threat still carried on the wind. She waited a moment, ensuring her complete solitude, before feeling bold enough to trot off to the lake. The cold water pricked her skin like dozens of stinging nettles. Every muscle tightened and contracted as she scrubbed the mud from her legs. Dipping her head into the cool lake, Kallan closed her eyes and attempted to ease her anxiety, but the memories closed in, and the bombardment of voices, the darkness, and the weight of her chains all flooded back. Gasping, Kallan opened her eyes wide. At once the images vanished and left the lake, the rain, the tundra, and Astrid. Her hands shook as she ran them over her face, patting her eyes and clasping her hand multiple times to ensure herself that the wounds they had inflicted were gone. Kallan still trembled when she climbed out of the lake and pulled the clothes back on. While Kallan pulled her long, sodden hair out of her tunic, Rune bounded down the mountain with a large leather pack thrown over his shoulder. A quiver hung at his waist, matching an elegant black bow, etched with foreign runes he clutched with an affection any passerby could see. Over one arm he draped the black leather overcoat, but Kallan's eyes flashed red and her temper flared at the sword encrusted with jewels, strapped to his waist in possession. Kallan tightened her jaws. He battled with a slew of questions, and it was with envy that her eyes grazed the elding handle of her dagger still tucked into his waist. With one hand grasping his bow, Rune stopped in front of her, shuffled the overcoat, then draped it over Kallan's shoulders. The coat was thick, heavy, and hung to the ground. Despite belonging to a Dvalgar, it smelled wonderfully of earth and pine. Regardless, Kallan shrugged her shoulders in disgust, letting the coat fall to the ground. "The nights are getting longer," Rune said, not moving yet to retrieve the coat from the ground. "You'll be grateful you have it at night when the temperature drops." "I don't care," Kallan said. "I'll not wear their clothes." "All right," Rune said. "Take off your clothes." Kallan threw back her shoulders and her neck flushed red. "That's Dvalgar clothing you're wearing," Rune said, with a smug look that seemed to savor the look of horror splayed on her face. "We don't have the conditions to be choosy," Rune said with indifference. "Wear it or don't. Freeze or take the coat. Walk through Midgard naked for all I care." And Rune stood, waiting, ready, and watching to see what choices she would make. After a heavy pause, Kallan grabbed the coat from the ground and pulled it back over her shoulders. The soft furs engulfed her in warmth, immediately ridding her of the chill in the air. She slid her tiny arms through the large sleeves that extended well past her hands. After she snuggled her body into the thick furs, Rune moved to the horse and fastened the pack to Astrid's saddle. Kallan frowned over a tuft of black fur that tickled her nose and whipped about with each spoken word. "You have a sword!" She was too angry to hide the resentment in her tone. Rune shifted a bored look, then fastened the satchel. "I'm traveling with a Dokafar," he said. "I have to protect myself." Kallan's eyes flashed with hot rage. "And a bow!" she added, doing her best not to shriek. "And my dagger!" Without a word, Rune gave a final jerk of the strap. "Take it!" he dared. Kallan clenched her fist and fought the ache to curl up there on the ground and die. After an exchange of matching glowers, Rune collected the bundle of saxifrage and led them north. The terrain widened the farther north Kallan and Rune traveled. It stretched on all day, and without the change to the vast clusters of cotton grass that mingled with patches of tundra willow, glowing crimson like a sea of fire. Treeless hills rolled over valleys and stretched into wide plains that rose into cold gray mountains, cradling them on either side, while vast clouds covered what little skies peeked beyond the towering peaks. The river was a sight in itself. Torrential rapids flowed into calm waters as it twisted through the land, winding through the mountain's base. Its supply of fish was abundant. There seemed to be no end to the lakes and streams that met the water's path. They stopped only to replenish their water supply, spear fresh salmon from the river, or pluck a grouse from the sky during takeoff. The rains continued well into the evening, long after the afternoon sun settled behind the mountains. In darkness, Kallan and Rune walked, saying nothing as they made their way across the endless tundra. Kallan threw a frequent glance to Bloton tucked at the waist of Rune's trousers, and spent much of her time brooding on how to take it back, while Rune threw her an occasional glance blanketed in vague expressions she couldn't read. The rains ended long before they rested, and it was with heavy eyes, weighted with exhaustion, that Rune finally stopped. "What are you doing?" Kallan asked, with the rein still clutched in her hand. "It's not safe to go any further tonight," Rune said. "We'll set up camp here and head out tomorrow before the rising sun." Rune was already busy untying a run of salmon from Astrid's saddle. "We can't stop," Kallan said. "We have to keep going. The roads are too dangerous to risk travel at night." Too exhausted to argue further, Rune turned his back and disappeared into the forest before Kallan could object. "I'm going for wood." Kallan listened to his footsteps die away, leaving her alone with Astrid. Desperate to catch a glimpse of light, she scanned the forest for a bit of light, then turned her eyes to the sky. The cloud cover was still too thick to see what moon was out. Disgruntled, she released her save light with a wave of her hand and set to work removing Astrid's saddles and furs. Wearily, she dumped the last of the furs onto the saddle and patted Astrid's forehead. He nudged her pouch, but before Kallan could move to withdraw an apple, a branch popped and she fired a haphazard shot in the general direction of the disruption. Leaves sizzled and wood splintered beneath the trail of save. A young tree chawed in half by Kallan's flame creaked as it fell behind Rune, who stood, hand raised, his palm still smoking from where he drew the scythe into him. A pile of broken twigs, branches, and small logs lay scattered at his feet. "It's me!" he said beside a tall shrub that sizzled black and orange with smoldering flames. "I know," she said, and returned to Astrid, leaving Rune to recollect the branches and twigs from the ground. Over her shoulder she stole a glance and watched the swiftness of his hands as he gathered the timber engrossed in his work. She recalled the arch of his back as his body took in her scythe. Her eyes followed the curve of his back and she bit her bottom lip. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" he asked, not bothering to raise his eyes. "Catch it." Rune stood, his arms loaded down with fixings to build a fire. His eyes bore into her with a conviction that made her want to look away. Instead, she matched his stare and waited while he approached her. "I don't know," he said, and proceeded to a small clearing where he dumped the branches on the ground. He broke the wet sticks and loudly shuffled a little bit of dried wood through damp, dead leaves and pine needles. "I was hoping you could tell me," he said. Kallan scoffed. Stones clicked over and over, tweaking Kallan's nerves with each click, click, click. She dropped herself before Rune's pile of brush. Click, click. Kallan pulled the overcoat around her, and Rune struck the stones. Another click, and Kallan fired an angry blast into the wood pile, sending Rune falling back from the sudden explosion as he dropped his rocks. Partially singed, Rune sat up cursing. The wood already hissed from the day's deluge, and burned hot as Rune settled himself back down, void of objection. Rune took up a stick and poked at the fire. "Where'd you learn your tricks?" he said. "Where'd you learn yours?" she asked. Rune looked up from the flames. The corner of Kallan's mouth twitched and leaned forward. "Would you mind if I—" Kallan said, splaying a palm on the wet ground, as Rune straightened his back. Golden threads of scythe flowed from her fingertips, and snaked their way over the earth to Rune. Her scythe threaded his, following his line, and plunging deeper into the core where the heart of his scythe gave him life. There the darkness began, and the lines of scythe ended. There Kallan could go no further. She stretched her limits, pushed her scythe against the shadow, but frustration overcame her curiosity, and she withdrew quite suddenly, allowing his body to fall limp and leaving him gasping for breath on all fours. Rune gasped. Kallan could hear his heart racing. I want to stand, Rune said between breaths. I want to arm myself and fight. Kallan tensed, preparing herself for battle, but Rune remained kneeling on all fours while he caught his breath. What is it? He asked, still visibly shaken from the surge of adrenaline. Kallan shook her head and sank back into the large leather coat. I don't know, she said, pulling in a large, deep breath. And despite sharing a fire with her enemy, despite the war, her hate, and her company, she slipped into the stories planted there by Gudrun ages ago. Anything to escape the fresh memories of the Dvergar caves. The earth grows wild in Midgard, Kallan said. Her eyes shone with love for the Lord. We receive the Seid as a gift from Freya, a gift she infused in us all. The Seid is in you. The Seid that nurtures Alfheim grows with our use of it, wielding it, honing it, allowing it to flourish. The air drips with it. Carried on the wind as Alfheim breathes, it moves, it lives. Kallan listened, and remembered the streams of gold that passed through the walls of the cave. She shivered despite the warm night air. The Seid is also here in Midgard, she continued, buried beneath the soil and forgotten by man, dormant and ready, waiting to be released from its prison. Rune remained seemingly enraptured, as if he hung on every word she muttered, and it lulled him into repose. Ages ago I trekked these lands. The earth was different then, she said. There are those who found the Seid and harbored its growth. During those years they tamed it. That was when the sons of man still wielded its powers, granting them the long life that now comes naturally to the Alfar. What happened? Rune asked. How did the race of men forget? Kallan smiled. Gudrun spoke of a king whose hand stretched across the lands. He uttered spells and the sun turns grass to dust. There the snows no longer fell. For nearly 600 years his followers destroyed all who opposed him. Like a plague they annihilated any who dared defy the desert king. Kallan tucked her legs to her chest, resting her chin into the crook of her knees. She stared into the fire beyond the flames and remembered. The followers of the desert king declared that he alone was the high king, and sought to destroy all who opposed that claim. The Sidkona's very existence proved Freya lived, that there were others who had, and the Sidkona were haunted. Kallan gazed at Rune across the fire. Orange shadow spilled over Rune's face, making him appear more threatening than usual as he sat enraptured. This is not the Midgard I knew so long ago, when the Dagafar journeyed from Schwat to Alfheim. Why did your people leave? Rune asked. I'm sure in all this time the Liazova have composed some explanation, she said, adding a bitter grin. Rune shrugged. Biased speculation, he said. Random stories, buried now in legends, twisted with so many versions, it's hard to see which parts are truth anymore. Kallan rested her chin back to her knees as she tugged at the overcoat, pulling it down against a breeze. She flicked back a lock of her hair that had dried into ringlets and spilled to the ground. Why did the Dagafar come to Alfheim? He asked again. Kallan shifted her gaze back to Rune, studying him. We warred with another who had been our kinsman, she said, and a schism divided us. Schwat to Alfheim. That is what Eric said. So your father sought to revisit an insatiable bloodlust, Rune surmised aloud. But before the last word left his mouth, Kallan was on him, pulling her dagger from his waist and pressing the tip to his throat. Do not speak of what you do not know, she hissed. Heartbroken, my father forfeited that war, abandoning that realm to his foe. Sweat beaded on Rune's brow, and he gulped down the nut that grazed the tip of her blade. But not all the Schwartzefar saw things his way, did they? Rune said. Kallan lowered the dagger and sank back on her knees. Have stayed behind, she said. What became of them? Kallan shrugged. Wonder suspended in the air as Kallan took the time to pull the overcoat back over her shoulders. He waited until she had snuggled back into its furs before asking. What would make a king abandon half his people and his kingdom? Rune asked. Kallan stared into the flames. A bright red log broke in two and fell, releasing a spray of red embers that floated into the air between them. Kallan peered up from the flames. The death of my mother at the hand of an old friend. The Dvergar King Monsognia.